The dog came out of the dark at the edge of the parking lot, with something in his mouth. Not food. He was carrying something, holding it with a deliberateness that had nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with intention. He was a German shepherd, black and tan, with a muzzle gone gray and ribs that showed through his dull coat in a way that should not have been possible for a dog built the way he had once been built. He moved slowly, not weakly, deliberately, the way trained animals move when they have a task and they are not going to be rushed. He crossed the gravel apron of the Elk Ridge Diner in Breckenridge, Colorado, at 8 in the morning in 8 degrees of January air, and he walked to the man sitting on the curb near the propane tanks, and he set the bowl down at the man's feet and looked up at him and waited. Nobody in the diner saw it happen. Nobody who mattered was watching. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and follow it all the way to the end, because what that bowl meant and whose dog was carrying it will change the way you think about a promise. We read every single comment. Noah Garrett was 39 years old and had been many things before he was a man sitting on a diner curb in January. He was tall, 6'2", and the frame of him still carried the proportions of a man built for work. Though the past 14 months had taken weight from him the way hard seasons take weight from things that can spare it and from things that cannot. He had dark hair that had grown past his preferred length and a jaw shadowed by several days of not caring, and his eyes were a deep, particular brown, the color of creek water running over dark stone, the kind that goes quiet the way deep water goes quiet, watching everything and giving nothing back. He wore a Carhartt jacket that had been with him for 7 years and cargo pants and boots that were resoled and serviceable. There was a cup of coffee beside him on the curb that the diner cook had brought out 40 minutes ago without being asked. Because she was that kind of woman, and he had not finished it yet because he'd been sitting with something that didn't go well with coffee. He had been a senior chief petty officer with the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DEVGRU, which civilians sometimes called SEAL Team 6, which was not precisely accurate, but was close enough that he'd stopped correcting it. 4 deployments, Ramadi, Mosul, Kandahar, and a 4th to Syria in 2022 that he was not at liberty to describe in detail and that he thought about every day. He had been medically separated from the Navy in November of 2023, following a traumatic brain injury sustained during that 4th deployment. A separation that should have been characterized as honorable, and had not been, due to a clerical error in his separation paperwork that had placed a code in his discharge documentation that made him ineligible for VA medical benefits and GI Bill educational benefits and most of the support structures that exist for veterans of his service length and injury profile. He had identified the error 11 days after separation. He had been attempting to correct it for 14 months. He had a JAG officer in Virginia named Captain Elise Tron working the case, and she was good at her job. And the case was moving. And 14 months was not an unusual timeline for a paperwork correction in the military administrative system, which operated on a calendar that had nothing to do with the calendar of a man living in a truck in Colorado in January. He was not without resources. He had savings, diminished. He had the truck. He had a phone and a laptop and a storage unit in Colorado Springs that held what remained of his material life. He worked odd jobs, construction cleanup, equipment transport, 1 week at a ski resort loading luggage that he did not tell anyone he was overqualified for because he needed the work, and the work was honest. He was not broken. He had been in worse situations than this by objective measure. And he knew the difference between a situation that was hard and a situation that was hopeless. And this was hard. What he carried that made it harder than the material circumstances warranted was the particular weight of a man who knows what he is and cannot currently prove it to the systems that are supposed to know, who has a file number and a case and a JAG officer who believes him, and who still wakes up on some mornings in the truck with a specific cold that comes not from the temperature, but from the distance between who you were and where you are. He had known Donnie Reyes for 11 years. They had gone through Bud Cess a year apart and served together on and off for most of the time since, the way men who are made from similar materials end up in proximity to each other through the logic of shared work. Donnie was louder than Noah by nature, quicker to laugh, the kind of man who remembered the names of people's dogs and their children and the towns they came from, who could make a 12-hour vehicle convoy feel shorter by the quality of his company. He had married Carmen in 2014. The boys had been born in 2013 and 2016, which meant Luis had been 6 when his father died, and Marco had been 9, and Noah had not been able to get to Colorado Springs for the funeral because he had been in a military hospital at the time. And the visit he had made 3 months after, sitting in Carmen's kitchen while the boys were at school, holding a cup of coffee he hadn't wanted, was one of the harder things he had done in a year that had contained several hard things. What he'd been sitting with this morning, the thing that didn't go well with coffee, was a phone call he'd received the previous evening from Captain Tran. She had found something in the Men-Double Lead transfer records. Military Working Dog, the program that handles the adoption and reassignment of retired or fallen service dogs. Noah had asked her to check the records 3 months ago, when he learned from a mutual contact that the transfer of a dog named Bear, the Melbuyud of his closest friend, Senior Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes, killed in Syria on November 14th of 2022, had never been completed. Bear had been supposed to go to Danny's widow, Carmen, in Colorado Springs. Carmen had been told the dog was unavailable for transfer, that he'd been reassigned to active service. That was not true. The truth, which Captain Tran had found in the records, was that Bear had been placed in the Breckenridge County Animal Services facility 11 months ago after a federal transport contractor had misrouted his transfer paperwork, and had been sitting in that facility ever since, listed under a case number rather than a name, his military identification, and a file that the facility's director had not opened. Noah had driven to Breckenridge Animal Services twice in the past 3 months, once in October and once in December, describing Bear and asking if they had a German Shepherd matching his profile. Both times he'd been told no. Both times he now knew Bear had been 50 feet away. He had been sitting on the curb thinking about this when the dog came out of the dark with the bowl. Noah looked at the bowl first. It was blue plastic, standard military kennel issue, with a dent on the left rim from some old impact. He looked at it for a full second before he looked up at the dog. The dog was watching him. His amber eyes, despite everything his body had endured, were clear and specific and completely present. His ears, which had once stood at precise attention, drooped slightly with fatigue, but they were oriented at Noah with the focused interest of an animal that has made a decision about a person and is waiting for the person to catch up. Noah looked at the left ear. At the base of the ear, where the fur was shortest, he could see the tattoo. The small alphanumeric code burned into the skin of every military working dog at the time of their service assignment. The permanent record that could be read by any handler who knew where to look. He got off the curb. He went to one knee in the gravel, which was cold through his pants, and he put his hands, careful, scarred hands that had done careful and uncountable things, on either side of the dog's face, and held it, and looked at the ear, and read the code. He had Danny's handler records memorized. He had memorized them the week after Danny died because it was one of the things he could do. The code matched. Noah did not move for a long moment. His hands stayed where they were, holding the gray muzzled face of a dog who had survived 11 months in a facility that had not known what it had, and who had escaped that facility sometime in the night, and who had walked however far he had walked in 8-degree air to find a curb where a man was sitting with something he couldn't finish, and had brought him a bowl. The cold was very real and very present. The gravel was hard through his pants. None of that registered. He had been looking for this dog for 3 months. He had not expected to find him like this. Noah knew why Bear had brought the bowl. He had been in Kandahar in 2019 when Donnie had trained him to do it. Had sat in the dust outside their billet on a hot afternoon and watched Donnie put the bowl in Bear's mouth with the patience and seriousness Donnie brought to everything involving the dog, and say, "When you need something, you ask. You bring the bowl. Okay? You bring the bowl." Bear had learned it in 3 sessions. He had brought it to Donnie's bunk every morning at 6:15 for the remainder of the deployment, which Donnie had found either charming or exhausting depending on the day. He had brought it on the morning of the day he died. Donnie had filled it and gone back to sleep, which Noah knew because Noah had been the one awake, and the bowl had still been sitting beside Donnie's bunk that evening when they came back without him. Noah had his phone in his hand. He called the MEN-W Registry's emergency identification line. He read the code from Bear's ear. The registry officer pulled the record. "Handler of record," she said. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Daniel A. Reyes. Status of Handler Kia, November 14, 2022. Transfer order to civilian adoptee." She paused. "Transfer status shows incomplete. Adoptee of record is a Carmen Reyes, Colorado Springs address." Another pause. "Sir, are you the one who found this animal?" "Yes," Noah said. "Can I get your name?" He told her. There was a silence on the line that had a particular quality to it. The quality of a person on the other end recalibrating. The way people recalibrate when the name they've just been given means something to them. "Senior Chief Garrett," she said. "I have a note on this file. It says you called in October and December," he said. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it, which he could hear, and which he filed away without reaction because there would be time for that later. "I'm going to flag this file as located. Can you hold?" He put the phone against his thigh and looked at Bear. Bear was sitting now, the bowl on the ground between them, his body exhausted and patient, and still clearly a working dog even in the state he was in, spine straight, eyes on Noah, waiting. The diner cook had come out while Noah was on the phone. Her name was Laurel, 58 years old, silver hair in a braid, hands that smelled permanently of coffee and griddle grease. She had been watching through the window and had brought a bowl of warm water and a plate of scrambled eggs without being asked, and she set them down beside Bear and went back inside without a word, which was the right thing to do, and she knew it. Bear did not touch the food until Noah said okay, because that was how Danny had raised him. Noah put the phone back to his ear. Captain Tran was already on the line. The registry officer had patched her through. She told him she'd seen the flag come up on Bear's file. She told him that the facility's director had been collecting the federal military working dog housing allocation for 11 months, a monthly federal payment intended to fund the care of military service animals awaiting transfer, while providing care that a preliminary review of the animal's condition upon escape would indicate was significantly below the program's minimum standards. She told him this constituted a misappropriation of federal program funds and fell under the jurisdiction of the same federal oversight body that had been reviewing his own case. "The same file," she said. "Your case and Bear's case are now in the same file. How long?" he said. "For Bear, I can have a release order to the facility by this afternoon." She paused. "For yours, this is going to move things." Vance Hollis was 49 years old and ran Breckenridge County Animal Services with the specific efficiency of a man who views the resources allocated to his department as a measure of his success, and the animals in his department as the cost of that success. He was not a man who had chosen this work from love. He was a man who had worked his way up through county administration with budget management skills and a talent for writing grant applications, and who had arrived at his current position 7 years ago and had immediately identified the federal military working dog retirement housing allocation as a reliable revenue stream that required minimal documentation and even more minimal scrutiny. Given the low public profile of the animals it nominally funded, he had used the allocation, $2,400 per month per animal, to cover departmental operating costs that had nothing to do with Bear's care. Bear had received the same level of care as any other animal in the facility, adequate for county budget purposes, insufficient for an 86-pound German Shepherd who had spent 9 years as an elite military working animal, and who needed, at minimum, twice the exercise, twice the protein, and a fraction of the isolation he had received in 11 months. He had dismissed Noah in October with the explanation that no German Shepherd matching the description was in his facility's care. Noah had described Bear in specific terms: the ear, the build, the coloring, the age range. Hollis had looked him over the way people look over men who have been living in trucks in January and said, without particular malice, "We process a lot of animals. I can't help you." He had dismissed him again in December with the same explanation, in the same tone, and Noah had stood in the lobby for a moment after the door to Hollis's office had closed and looked at the hallway that led to the kennel block, and had calculated what it would cost him to walk down it anyway. He had not walked down it. He had been trying to do things correctly, and walking unauthorized into a county facility's kennel block was not doing things correctly. Both times, Bear had been in Kennel 7, 50 feet away. When Noah walked into Breckinridge County Animal Services that afternoon, he was not alone. Captain Tran had made 3 calls in the preceding 4 hours, 1 to the facility, serving formal notice of the MEMW'd registry's claim on Bear, 1 to the Federal Program Oversight Office, flagging the housing allocation discrepancy for preliminary review, and 1 to a reporter at the Denver Post named Sandra Ocha, who covered Veterans Affairs and Animal Welfare, and who had asked, when Captain Tran finished explaining, only, "How soon can I be there?" Noah placed the file on Hollis's desk. It contained Bear's chip and registry records, the 11 months of federal housing allocation payments with the department expenditure records showing where the money had gone, the 2 visit logs from October and December with the dates and the staff names of the employees who had told him no German Shepherds were present, and the MEMWD program's minimum care standards with a notation prepared by a veterinarian who had examined Bear that morning of the specific ways Bear's current condition fell short of each one. He did not raise his voice. He said, "Bear is leaving with me today. The release order is already on your system." Captain Tran sent it at 2 o'clock. "What I'd suggest you think about between now and tomorrow morning is how you want to explain 11 months of federal housing payments to the Oversight Office, because they'll have questions, and the answers you give them will determine how the next part of this goes for you." Hollis looked at the file. He looked at Noah. He had prepared a response, the institutional response, the administrative buffer language he had been refining in the 2 hours since the release order arrived. He looked at Noah's eyes, which were the color of dark water going quiet, and at the dog at Noah's heel, who was watching the door with the patient, contained attention of an animal who has already assessed the situation and knows which way out it goes. Hollis signed the release form. Bear was in the passenger seat of Noah's truck by 4 in the afternoon, a blanket across his lap, the blue bowl on the floor at his feet. He was not restored. 11 months of inadequate care does not reverse in an afternoon, but he was out, and he was warm, and the eggs Laurel had brought him that morning had been a start. He did not sleep on the drive. He sat and watched the road with his clear, tired eyes, the way working dogs watch things they have decided need watching. And Noah drove and said nothing for the first hour, which was the amount of time he needed. He called Carmen from a rest stop outside Colorado Springs. He had thought about how to make this call for the past 3 months and had not arrived at a version that was not going to be difficult, and so he made it directly and without preamble. Because Carmen Reyes was a woman who had been told hard things before and who deserved the truth without decoration. He told her Bear was alive. He told her where Bear had been. He told her he was 40 minutes away. There was a silence on the line. "He's with you right now?" she said. "Passenger seat," Noah said. Another silence. "He always liked the passenger seat," she said. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who is holding something together with specific effort and is going to continue holding it together because there are children in the house. "Noah, are you okay?" It was the first time in 14 months anyone had asked him in a way that meant they wanted the actual answer. "Getting there," he said. He pulled into Carmen's driveway at 6:15. She was on the porch before he opened the door. Her sons, Marco, 11, and Luis, 8, were behind her, one on each side, with the barely contained energy of boys who have been told something is happening, but not what. Bear got out of the truck slowly, still stiff, and stood on the driveway, and Carmen Reyes walked down the porch steps and crouched in the snow in front of him and put her hands on his face the same way Noah had done that morning in the gravel of the Elk Ridge parking lot. Bear pressed his nose against her cheek and held it there. Marco and Luis came down the steps. Luis sat in the snow without appearing to notice it was cold, and Bear turned and lay down beside him in the way large dogs lay down beside small children, with the deliberate, careful weight of an animal that understands it is being trusted with something. Noah stood at the edge of the driveway and watched. He did not go inside for a while. He stood at the truck and let it happen, because some reunions belong to the people they belong to, and his role in this one had been to keep a promise Donnie had sent him in a text message 6 hours before an ambush on a road outside Damascus. "Get Bear to Carmen if anything happens. Promise me." He had promised. It had taken him longer than he had wanted, and the path had been harder than he had anticipated, and Bear had done a portion of the navigation himself, which Danny would have found either completely predictable or very funny, and probably both. Carmen looked up at him from the snow. "Come inside," she said. "It's cold." He went inside. Vance Hollis resigned from Breckenridge County Animal Services in March, 2 weeks before the Federal Oversight Review was scheduled to issue its preliminary findings. The review, which continued without him, documented 11 months of housing allocation misappropriation, totaling $26,400, and cited specific failures in the minimum care standards for 3 other animals in the facility's care besides Bear. The county board retained an outside administrator to run the facility pending a full operational review. Sandra Ocha's story ran in the Denver Post in February, and the headline was the kind that gets shared. Bear's weight was back to 81 pounds by April, under the care of a veterinarian in Colorado Springs who had worked with military service animals for 20 years and who told Carmen that his prognosis was excellent and that he had the constitution of a dog who had decided he had things left to do. He slept in Luis's room. He woke Luis for school every morning by putting his paw on the edge of the bed, which Luis did not find annoying and which Marco, who had a later start, considered insufferably loud. Bear attended exactly 1 day of Luis's school, Career Day, by invitation of the principal, who had read Sandra Ocha's story, and sat at the front of the classroom while a retired Marine explained military working dogs to 22 third graders who had approximately 900 questions. Bear answered none of them verbally, but he did allow his ears to be touched, which the Marine said was high praise. Noah's discharge paperwork correction came through on a Tuesday in April, 6 weeks after Bear's case drew federal attention to his file, and moved it to the front of a queue that had been, until then, moving at the pace of things that have no one watching them. The correction was retroactive to his date of separation. His VA benefits were restored. He received a call from Captain Tran at 7 in the morning and sat in his truck, which he was no longer living in, and held the phone for a long time after she finished talking before he said anything. "Thank you, Elise," he said. "Thank Bear," she said. He drove to Colorado Springs that weekend. Bear was on Carmen's porch in the April sun when he pulled in, lying in the specific way of large dogs who have found a warm patch and decided it belongs to them. The boys were at school. Carmen brought coffee out, and they sat on the steps and looked at the mountains and didn't need to fill the quiet, because the quiet was full enough already. Sometimes a promise doesn't end at the grave. Sometimes it travels through paperwork and bureaucracy and 11 months in a kennel and 8 degrees on a January morning until it finds the person who made it and puts a bowl at his feet and waits. God does not always keep his promises through the living. Sometimes he keeps them through a dog who knows exactly what was owed and refuses to stop asking. The men and women who serve carry debts we cannot calculate and make promises under conditions we cannot imagine. And what they do with those promises, even the broken ones, even the delayed ones, even the ones that required an escaped dog and a cold parking lot to complete, is what honor actually looks like when you get close enough to see it. Bear brought a bowl to the man who had promised. The man got up off the curb. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to know that the promises made in the hardest places are still being kept. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever kept a promise when keeping it cost you something, we want to hear it. Your story may be the one that reminds someone else what they still owe. And if you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the debts we carry home from war, please subscribe so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you that the bowl is still being brought if you're willing to get off the curb.